All right. My name is Ben Burgis. This is Give Them an Argument. I am joined by Rob. Oh, wait. Where's Rob? No. Rob is stuck in traffic. I told him I would amuse everybody until he got here. Maybe tell some jokes, do some crowd work, maybe balloon animals, ask people where they're from. But in all seriousness, if anybody wants to do a little Q&A with the chat while we were waiting for Rob, we can do that. And if you don't have that, then I'm afraid I'm going to have to inflict the RNC on you since, I'm really no good at balloon animals. So that's what I can think of. But yeah, actually, let's see what is going on at the RNC right now. So we have Steve Witkoff, businessman.
Tell the world about your boy. My boy was the best of us. Where we lived in New York City, a Trump building, 502 Park Avenue, there were 12 homeless people who stayed outside by the church next to the property. My son got to know them all. He fed them every evening. He became their friend. When he passed away, all 12 came to his funeral. He and President Trump shared something in common. My boy stood up for people, no matter which side of the train tracks they came from, exactly as the president does for everybody.
All right. I see that the threat worked. We got an anything but this request. Ender says thoughts on Levinas. Why not? I'm ashamed to admit I've never really read much Levinas or almost any. I can vaguely remember owning one of his books once. I can visualize it. Get it in a Barnes and Noble. It's like, French philosopher. I don't know. Let's check this out. And I can remember turning some of those pages. I do not remember a lot of understanding dawning, but to be fair, I don't know if that was Levinas's fault or my fault, because this was, I don't know, I was probably like 20, during this period of time when we're talking about. But man, ask me about, ask me about a philosopher other than Levinas. Yeah. How about turning to Rozdalski for a change of Marx commentator? God, you guys keep giving me people I don't know. Let me look this guy up. Roman Rozdalski, the historian, is this who you're talking about? Oh yeah, there we go. The Making of Marx's Capital. All right. If the man does podcasts, I'm open to that. Yeah, let's see. I actually am writing one thing about, okay, it's a Hegelian, gotcha. Okay, yeah, no, that could definitely be an interesting conversation. I mean, look, in some ways, that's kind of the conversation I was trying to have with Matt McManus 2 Mondays ago. When I brought him on to talk about the G.A. Cohen book, Karl Marx's Theory of History, since, ultimately Matt's, he has a mixed evaluation. He likes a lot of things about that book, right? But ultimately his objection to it is that it's not Hegelian enough. That he does, he wants to hear about the totality, he wants more dialectics, so and I actually think that is definitely a conversation worth having. I'm actually writing something for the Substack right now that might go up on Sunday, or it might wait until the following Sunday. I'm not sure. I also have something I want to get out there relatively soon that's about political violence. But in any case, I am writing something right now that's criticizing David Harvey's book about capital, which, you know, kind of for the opposite reason as Matt's criticism of the Cohen book on Karl Marx's theory of history, that you know, I actually like quite a bit about the Harvey companion to Marx's Capital, but I dislike the bit about dialectics, because one, I think that Harvey gives analytical Marxism, and you know, he doesn't quite give it a fair shake. I think he doesn't quite understand what the analytical Marxists are saying, and you know, I think the way he talks about dialectics, I think, is sort of the weakest part of the Harvey book. That, you know, I don't think that sort of claims made in dialectical language are necessarily wrong, right? Like if you talk about like contradictions in that, you know, Hegelian sense of contradictions, right? The dialectical sense of contradictions. I don't necessarily think those assertions are wrong, but I think to judge whether they're right or wrong, I do think you need to translate them from Hegel speak into ordinary language of causes and effects and mechanisms. And, you know, and I think the way that Harvey does it, I think at his worst kind of intentionally doesn't do that, because he says, no, you have to understand, Marx not making a causal argument, he's making a dialectical argument, which is this special different thing that you have to represent by drawing a bunch of circles. And I find all that stuff very unhelpful. So I am working on that essay right now. Also, something else that's capital related, although this probably won't be for a few more weeks. I do want to write something on William Clare Roberts' book, Marx's Inferno, the political theory of capital, because I think that you know, which again is a book that I, you know, for different reasons, it's not about the dialectic stuff in that instance, but I think, you know, I think Roberts gets some stuff right and some stuff wrong, and it's definitely worth getting into. But yeah, Apo Fatika Fabung, you gotta change to a handle. It's easier to say than that. Says Rozdalski was much more famous once upon a time. Perhaps he's due for a discussion again. Yeah, you know, I'll definitely take the note on that. But well, maybe instead of not necessarily wrong, I should say sometimes definitely right. But yeah, fair enough. Not necessarily wrong does sound like incredibly faint praise. Kevin, not sure what the blue mag is in reference to, but I am all ears. I mean, you know, I think there's lots of stuff that phrase could accurately describe. I'm just not sure what you're thinking of here. Let's see. Also, how about more films? Well, there are plans for me and Jason Miles and Trey Reed to get together to talk about Life Force sometime soon. So I'm definitely happy to do that. Like I kind of know that those movie streams, you know, don't get very good views, but I think it's kind of worth it. You know, I'm happy to sacrifice the algorithm a little bit there because I enjoy doing them so much. Let's see. Yeah, the Levinas thing was, you know, reminded me of many years ago at the University of Miami, where I went to grad school. I remember there was this guy who I am blanking on the name of the person, but anyway, as an academic, like logician, and he was coming in for a conference, and apparently when he was, you know, I don't know, going through the passport check or whatever at the airport, they you know, he was coming from Australia, and they were asking him what he did for a living, and he said he was a philosophy professor, and he actually got the you know, TSA or whatever, whichever it is, whichever checkpoint this was, he actually got the person who wanted to test him by asking him about Hegel. He was like, "Oh crap, could I do Carnap?" Right? Why Hegel? So Hegel, I'd probably be able to do better than that guy would, but yeah, Levinas sadly is a little bit outside of the sphere that I'm going to be able to say much about. Let's see. Just saw from Dave Weigel on Twitter. CPAC's Matt Schlapp says the Dems are trying to switch their nominee in a tofu-filled room, which seems like a joke that could stand to be workshopped a little bit before you try it out in public. But there's something there. Not quite sure it works yet, but I see what he's trying to do. Badu, we're getting warmer for sure. God, do I have stuff to say about Badu? Let me think about that. I at least have a better idea of what some of his central claims are than I do for Levinas. So that helps. But I certainly can't claim to be, anything like intimately familiar. I think that yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm always a little confused when, like, the part of Badu that I guess from what little I know, that I was always least clear on. Yes, you said the politics, maybe. I think I'm actually a little bit clearer on the political claims. The part that I was always the least clear on is the invocations of set theory, and just kind of how much of a metaphor that was, and how how exactly you're supposed to parse that. But man, can you guys take pity on me and ask me about some analytic philosophers, or at least some older continental philosophers who I might have more stuff to say about? Yeah. Well, yes, you say mathematics equals ontology. I guess I don't quite know what that means. This is kind of what I'm saying about not being clear on how much of a metaphor this is, and how literal it is, right? Because maybe this is just a sort of really simple-minded way of thinking about this, but just starting from the basics, right? If ontology is the question of like what stuff exists, right? Like Quine says, on what there is, then certainly a lot of people's answers to like which are the basic kinds of things that exist could include sets or other mathematical objects, numbers, whatever. So like, Quine himself, for example, famously describes himself as a reluctant Platonist, meaning that, he'd sort of be happier, all else being equal, just saying all that exists is physical stuff. But, he sort of feels forced by the arguments to accept that there is in fact some sort of Platonic realm of, sets, at least, because they're indispensable to our best scientific theories, that we don't know how to express them without invoking mathematical concepts that seems like they can't be reduced to anything more basic than sets. So I understand saying that one's ontology, in other words, one's claims about what stuff exists, includes sets or other mathematical objects, but the Badu mathematics equals ontology thing, like I was saying, it just makes me really confused, because if you're saying, what are you actually saying? Literally all that exists is mathematical objects? Because that seems weird, right? Like if I to mix philosophers, right? G. Moore has this famous argument for the existence of external objects, where he this isn't going to work if you're just, if you're doing the dishes and this is on in the background, but I'm holding up my hands here. He says, all right, here's my argument for external objects. Here's one, here's another one. And so it's like, look, my hands don't seem to be mathematical objects. They seem like physical objects. So the hell are you talking about, Badu? And on that, I can stop stonewalling because the people's economics professor, Robert motherfucking Larson, is in the house. So scourge of the ruling class, subject of his new book. How you doing, Rob?
I'm good, Ben. It's good to see you. Sorry, folks, that I got held up. The 5 was crazy.
Fair enough. That definitely happens as I'm in Mexico at least over the summer, but I was living in LA very recently and maybe again very soon, and I can certainly identify with that. Being late to things because traffic was insane. So I while you were gone, since I realized I can't make a balloon animal for shit,
that's one idea.
So I threatened them that if they didn't have questions for me in the chat, I would make them watch the RNC, and so we actually did watch it with the sound on for a minute, and then people came up with chat questions.
Wow, I bet they did.
I actually subjected myself to way more of the RNC than any doctor would ever recommend on Tuesday night, especially since I wrote this thing for MSNBC about it, and so I actually should probably consult a physician. I spent like a few hours watching RNC speeches, but
it's like radioactivity. Like there's the intensity and then the length of the exposure that determines the damage to you.
Yeah. It's a very fun timeline that the RNC takes place in, where Joe Biden defunded the police and set up a giant sign, at the border in San Diego, bienvenidos amigos.
Yes.
And
remember Kamala Harris's future presidential nominee, Kamala Harris's famous statement, "Do come." Remember that?
Yes.
Like that was an example of that real policy, which exists and is real.
Yes, exactly. Look, you can believe the statistics that says that the rate of deportations after arrest is actually higher under Biden, right? Or you can believe, or you could believe what in your heart is true, which is
that's right.
What the whatever's convenient for the narrative.
It's true. Crime statistics may be coming down nationally, but me being scared by crime on Rupert Murdoch's TV properties is going up. So, what about that?
Exactly.
That's powerful.
And again, I don't, I don't begrudge anybody being worried by crime, but just at least be worried about the verifiable stuff that's actually happened.
Plenty of real crime that you could care about. It's not people of color home invasioning your suburban home. It's not.
Yeah,
it's unlikely.
Yeah. No, it's so fucking stupid. Yes. Joe Biden, famous advocate of police defunding,
right. Yes.
Career long commitment there, constantly repeated in speeches. Tom Cotton at the RNC said Joe Biden thinks borders are racist, which is definitely sounds like our boy, Joe Biden.
He ran the Anita Hill hearing. They should love him, It's just the party label that keeps them from actually liking Biden. There's a lot from Biden to war on terror supporter, it's tough.
Well, one thing that one thing that I guess some of them don't like is that he's way too soft on Iran. So I saw Nikki Haley on the RNC on Tuesday, saying, giving the sort of hard sell for neocons to support Donald Trump, and she reminded them of his greatest achievements, like tearing up the Iran deal and assassinating Soleimani.
She is their brand ambassador too. Like that is very well observed. Like those really unpopular, horrifyingly dangerous things he did. Those were good. That's a lot of people are mad we didn't just occupy Iran. We did do these reckless, illegal acts, though. I mean, so you get something. You got a deal.
Yeah, exactly. But of course, I'm sure, to be fair, neither Biden nor Trump have taken us anywhere near as close to the brink of war with Iran as a friend of the show, Alan Dershowitz, would like. So when we last watched the Dersh talking to Glenn Greenwald about this, Glenn had just finished up his response, and the point that he just ended on was that we actually, if you're concerned about Iran developing nukes, then it turns out it's actually entirely possible to prevent this from happening through diplomacy, which we know because we actually did that at one point. And there was in fact a détente with Iran, the nuclear deal that seems to have been working just fine. And then the U.S. withdrew from it for no good reason whatsoever. So let's see how Professor Dershowitz responds to this.
We now come to the Q&A portion of the evening. There are mics over here and over there. We run this rather loosely, and first, at any time, the debaters can ask each other a question, and if you want to exercise the prerogative now, guys, please quiet down a little bit. Excuse me? I know we have 30 minutes. I know what? We have a 30-minute. Thank you, Jane, for prompting an old guy. We have 30 minutes for questions. However, we will allow the debaters to ask each other a question. If you would like to exercise that prerogative now or a bit later, we've got a lot of people lined up with questions. Either one. Alan, do you want to ask?
Say that again.
Do you want to ask Glenn a question?
Oh, I want to ask him a lot of questions.
Is it okay? Then maybe you want to leave the audience to ask it, or what do you want to do? You want to waive that, or you want to do it now? Go ahead.
My first question: was the world and was the Middle East a better place or a worse place under the Shah, with all the horrors and all the terrible things that the Pahlavi family and the Shah has done? Was the world safer, a better place under the Shah or under the Ayatollahs?
I mean, the only reason why that question would be relevant is because if Professor Dershowitz's real goal in pretending to convince you he wants a pinpoint strike on Iran's nuclear program is in fact what he's admitted, which is a regime change
I want
in Iran.
that.
And then the question becomes, do we want to once again have the CIA impose a savage and brutal dictatorship on Iran? I guess the question for whether the world was better off under the Shah was who you are. If you were Israel and the CIA, outstanding. I would love the Shah if I were Israel and the CIA. He did the United States' bidding. If you were a dissident in Iran, if you were somebody who was religious in Iran, if you were critical of the government in Iran, things were extremely grim for you because dissidents were savage and brutalized in prison, and that was why there were so
Well,
many
let me
people
ask
who
you a
overthrew them.
follow-up question. If there were an open and free election today in Iran, would the Ayatollah be elected, or if there were an election, even as you put it, between the brutal Shah and the nice Ayatollahs, who do you think would win the election in Iran today?
I didn't say the Ayatollahs were nice or nice Ayatollahs.
Who would win the election?
I think that
Who would win?
I'm not
you're
I'm
talking
not
about
I'm not a
democracy.
pollster even in the United States.
But you're talking about democracy. Who would win?
I don't think we know what the population of, but hold on. You can't just constantly interrupt. What I want to say is that if you look at history, what you will find is that the world is worse off, and the countries are worse off when we in the United States, working with Israel, go into countries and impose the governments that we want on those countries. There's hardly anything that I can imagine more brutal and savage and bad than that. So certainly I wouldn't want to live under the rule of the Ayatollah, but I also don't want Israel and the CIA picking Iran's leaders for it.
But all right, yeah, all right. I want. Do you want to ask a question of Alan?
I have a question for Professor Dershowitz,
Sure.
if I could.
Sure, please.
No question. No, you want to ask a question?
Do I want to ask? Yes, I definitely want to ask a question.
Lay the question. Go, ask it.
Okay. So the resolution that we're debating, that we're asking everybody to vote on, is that the United States should go and bomb Iran's nuclear facilities. But isn't it true that the reason you want that is because you actually want the United States and Israel to go in, as you told Newsmax 3 weeks ago, and facilitate? You want to remove the government of Iran and replace it with a more pro-Israel government, right? That's your real goal.
No, there's no question that it's a two-step process.
No.
I want to make sure, first of all, that be very clear about it. I want to be very clear that first step is if the current Iranian regime remains the regime, I don't want them to have nuclear weapons. But if we could bring about regime change, I would prefer that to bombing or destroying the nuclear reactor. We wouldn't have to. The Shah was oppressing his own people. He wasn't trying to export Islamic oppression to the rest of the Middle East and ultimately to the rest of the world, because he calls the United States the great Satan. So yes, I would like to see regime change. It would be good for the Iranian people. And you haven't answered the question. What if it were true? What if it were true? No, don't interrupt me. Hypothetically, what if you could conduct a poll and I could conduct a poll? It would be an honest poll. And the conclusion was that 70% of Iranian people would prefer to see the Shah or the Shah's son replace the current Ayatollah regime. And that what you were propping up essentially was a regime that is against the wishes of the Iranian people as well. How would you respond to that?
Nobody has any idea.
Not a question of democracy, because we don't know what democracy would produce in Iran. We've never had it.
Exactly. I totally agree with that last statement. Nobody knows what democracy would produce in Iran. But the only thing that I would ask you when you go to vote, because what he's telling you is the real purpose of this bombing campaign is regime change.
No.
And if you, yes, that is what you're saying is your real motive.
No,
that is where it will end up, because there is. Let me hold on.
Okay, let me answer.
There is no plan that would actually achieve any benefits that they want to achieve without removing the current Iranian government. That's what he said to Newsmax, was the only way we can achieve these benefits that we're trying to achieve is if we change the government, even though the current government had an agreement with the United States that was working. So I would ask you,
it wasn't working.
When you go to vote on whether or not you think that the United States efforts over the last 50 years to bring regime change to the world or to bomb other countries in this world has turned out to be good for those countries, has turned out to be good for those regions, and has turned out to be good for the United States. And if you think the answer is yes, vote with him. Go vote with him to have another one of these kinds of wars because that is what he's advocating.
I don't care how you vote.
Okay,
That's
okay,
up
all
to
right.
you.
Wait,
That's
look, wait,
a trivial
excuse me,
part of this
Professor
discussion.
Professor
I want to
Dershowitz,
respond.
Professor
You cut me
Dershowitz,
off.
we do
Yeah.
care how you vote, but you want to respond to that.
I just want to respond
Okay,
to that.
respond, and then I want
There
to
are
do
two
prerogatives. I want to do.
independent goals. One does not depend on the other. I think it will be very difficult to achieve regime change. That's why I want to make sure that the current regime doesn't have a nuclear arsenal.
I have
The
a
second stage, which is a desirable thing for the people of Iran and for the world and for the Middle East, is to have regime change and to introduce some form of democracy to Iran.
Okay, we heard
with
about
elections and not theocracy.
I just my moderator's prerogative to ask two brief questions, one of each. Glenn Greenwald, do you disagree strongly with those who claim that the record shows that Iran is Nazi-like toward Israel and wishes and wants and would further the goal of destroying Israel as a state? Do you agree with that view or disagree?
I think Israel hates a lot of its enemies. They hated Saddam Hussein. They wanted him gone. They wanted Syria and Assad gone. And I think Iran hates Israel as well. They're enemies. There's no question about that, which is precisely why Alan Dershowitz wants the United States military to go and take out another enemy of Israel and replace it with a region like a government like Saudi Arabia, like the United Arab Emirates, like Egypt, that are dictatorships that answer to the West and do Israel's bidding. And that is an extremely dangerous way to continue to conduct foreign policy. And I think all of history is on my side.
So you're thinking Iran is a danger to Israel? It is a danger to Israel, Iran.
I mean, for a long time, we were told that Saudi Arabia hated Israel. They had the same devotion to destroying Israel as Iran does. And Saudi Arabia is now engaged in diplomatic relations because of the attempt to bring Saudi Arabia into the international community. If you go and look at the other option, my option is not some illusory option. It actually happened in reality. I read you the studies that when there was an Iran deal to lift sanctions on them and bring them back into the international community, every single inspection agency, including the IAEA, that tried to convince the world that Saddam Hussein didn't have nuclear weapons before 2002, says that Iran gave up its nuclear aspirations, was allowing inspectors into those facilities. And that's what I think is a far more promising option than starting another war in the Middle East.
Don't you actually think, and tell the truth now, don't you actually think it would be better if Israel didn't exist as the nation state of the Jewish people?
No, I don't. Absolutely don't think that. I've never suggested that anything like that in my life. And if I wanted to advocate that, I would have no problem with telling everybody I do in favor of that. I don't hide what I think, unlike you, when you're advocating for bombing when you really want regime change. But I would have no problem. No, I don't want Israel
Professor Dershowitz,
a nuclear-armed Iran. Let me put the question a little differently.
Okay,
Let me put the question a little
forgive
differently.
me. You've asked a question. I have a brief question for you, Professor Dershowitz. Do you see an irony? Do you see an irony in your stating that Iran is the new Nazi Germany, but alongside your confidence that all we have to do is destroy the nuclear facility, and this new Nazi Germany will then be so nice and cooperative that they will then no longer try for nuclear facility.
I do not
see an irony in that.
I do not believe that Iran is the new Nazi Germany. I do not believe that there will ever be another Nazi Germany because of Israel. Israel has the strength and the ability that the Jewish community did not have in the 1930s. It would prevent
my question
Iran
was
from becoming the new Nazis. If they could, they would. And don't believe me, believe them.
I'm sorry.
Let me finish, please.
Yes,
Elie Wiesel once said, always believe the threats of your enemies more than the promises of your friends. And the Jewish people have learned from terrible experiences to believe the threats of their enemies. And Iran has threatened genocide, destruction of Israel, the end of the Israeli people and the end of the Jewish people. And Israel has to take that seriously. And the United States, as Israel's closest ally, has to help them avoid that genocide.
Okay, apologies for keeping you waiting in the audience. Let's start here. Please ask your question. Ask a question. No need to identify yourself.
Sure. First of all, I can't let past Glenn
Ugh. Yeah, see, that's the Dershowitz I can remember from like the from like the Norm Finkelstein thing on Democracy Now and all that, right? Like that sort of bark a question with like a really dubious premise, and then and then be like, well, do you?
Yeah. This is, he's much more in his Dersh zone than in the first portion. I feel like we're really getting the fullness of it here. Constant, interruptions, angrily insisting he not be interrupted, getting, the ineffectual moderator kind of sidelined by making up his own questions. And yeah, as you said, like weird questions, but if there had never been a Holocaust and now Israel was made of Armenians, how would you hate that? Like, what the hell is it? We came here to talk about, we're going to bomb Iran. It's like, why don't you admit that you would be happy if Israel was destroyed? Like, that's just the incredibly bad faith argumentation that we've come to expect.
Now tell the truth now.
You think Hitler a pretty good guy, right? Like, what the hell is that? Greenwald's just like, where have I ever suggested anything like that? Just instantaneously resorting to, well, I bet you'd kick a grandmother from Israel if you could. Just the, he's in his zone now. I feel like he's really warmed up.
Yeah, that seems right. As Dylan maybe pointed out in the chat, it is also notable that when he said, just admit that you don't want Israel to exist, he tossed in at the end of the sentence as the nation state of the Jewish people, which is it always like the kind of thing that drives me crazy, because like, look, we can, if you say, do you think Israel should not exist, the insinuation is that you think that like Israel should be like invaded and like just assimilated into some other country, or the conquering army should commit genocide against its people or something like that's the kind of thing this phrase right to exist conjures up. But then when you say, as the nation state of the Jewish people, it's like, okay, at this point, wouldn't a more honest way of answering that question just be, do you think Israel should be the nation state of the Jewish people, right? Like, because that's a very different sentence with a very different emotional valence than.
Yeah, there is like a lot more politically specific claim there, as opposed to just a country, existing with its current population in peace. Yeah, so pretty much instantly resorting to like, why am I arguing Iran? Admit that you're an anti-Semite. Like, let's just go right back to why am I doing this bit? I've got a classic. Let's push aside the new album and play the hits.
Yeah, exactly.
The crowd's pissed off.
Yeah, I mean, also like as we're streaming today, just now, like the last day, I think the Knesset just passed by 68-9 a resolution rejecting any sort of two-state solution. There could never be a there will just could never be a Palestinian state, even even if it's not unilateral, even if it comes about through negotiations, can't happen. Which, like, well, if you accept their premise, then no, I don't think Israel should be the nation state of the Jewish people, because if you don't think those millions of people should get a separate state of their own, then that leaves one non-apartheid option, right? That's me. But also fucking nothing to do with anything we were talking about. Like, this is just purely like, all right, I'm bored with this.
It really is like, why am I asking this weird hypothetical about the Shah? I think you just realize, like, well, I'm defending the Shah. Like, if anyone who, like, these are people, it sounds like an audience of more like Middle East history engaged people. Like, they're going to know who the Shah is and like what that record was and like what kind of regime it took for the Iranian revolution to occur in the specific hyper right-wing Shiite religious formation that it did. Like, it's because of the wall-to-wall suppression of all the independent elements and political parties and labor and everything else, and the big Iranian Communist Party, which was once a big deal. Like, why am I defending these guys? But it is great. Like, I like that. Like, well, now though he's trying to make the point that like, they look better than the Ayatollahs, which is an amazing. That's why he got off it. Like, why am I defending a Cold War dictator? Like, they're not coming back. That's a great question. Like, well, who would win an election, the current bad regime or the old regime, which maybe wasn't so bad? It was U.S. supported, or his son, who's probably turned over a new leaf, not the one needed turning. We're talking about how they're exporting Islamic oppression. Like, I'm sure you mean Saudi Arabia. Like, that is the big exporter in the region of the crazy Salafist version of Islam, and paying for all those madrasas in Pakistan and Egypt and Indonesia, like the great Islamic population countries of the world. Like, all those religious schools, that's all crazy right-wing Saudi money. Like, some countries really do export Islamic extremism if we're concerned about that. And of course, it's the one whose political authority completely relies on us once again.
Yeah, I mean, look, right now there is something of a Cold War, sometimes hot, between Iran and various forces that it supports, and the U.S. and various countries, primarily Israel and Saudi Arabia, that it supports. But if if that's what you mean by exporting Islamic extremism, that Iran supports groups like this, then it's like, well, maybe some sort of regional de-escalation and detente, would be the way out of that, right? Like, to get that situation to stop, which of course, the Iran deal was a step towards some sort of permanent diplomatic resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict would be another big step towards, and we just lost Rob. But yeah, I mean, look, I think that, yeah, man, that sucks. Okay. So, well, I'll just wrap up this point, and then if we haven't regained Rob yet, we might just watch a little bit more of the Q&A as we wait. But this question of well, what if hypothetically? Oh no, we've got a big echo right now. Testing.
Hey, I'm back.
Yeah, I see you.
Okay.
Testing. Okay, no, we're good.
Sorry about that.
Right. Yep, had an echo for a second. Yeah, but it's like, look, this question. Gosh, what if hypothetically it turned out that in a free election, the majority of Iranians would vote to resurrect the Shah from the dead and have him once again rule over them with an iron fist? Then what would you say, smart guy?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know what to do with that. It's like,
I don't know. Like, wow, I don't know. It's like, that's a great question. Let me answer that, Mr. Dershowitz. Another question. What if like Cyrus the Great like fought Hitler and Stalin? Like, what happens then? We're serious intellectuals. We're not wasting everyone's time. Like, yeah, it just goes to show how much like being humored all the time will like just destroy your ability to like. It's just really bad. However, again, though, once again, like Greenwald, like this is like the side of Greenwald that we all love, like it's like I did a minute ago, just like brings up the Saudis. He's like, well, the Saudis, everyone used to talk about how much they, and he's right, like the stewards of Mecca, how much they hate, the Zionist entity, and
sure,
Saudis had no shortage of, street feeling and even, official positions that were not very dissimilar to the Iranian Shiite theocracy across the Gulf. Amazing how we talk about how horrible that is, and we support the larger, richer, more evil one. Just the other branch of modern contemporary Islam.
To a remarkable extent. Oh no, go again.
Oh no.
Testing. Okay. Oh. But yeah, to a remarkable extent, like, everything that you can say that's true about how bad Iran is, that, talk about gender apartheid, talk about, the very undemocratic features of the system, like authoritarian enforcement of religious codes. Yeah. True, and true. Bad, and bad, right? There were like there was like actually massive popular unrest in Iran just a couple of years ago, right? And no quarrel with any of that. But also, like, yeah, every single one of those things is so much more true of the Saudis, right? Like, undemocratic features of the system. Well, let's see. In Iran, that mostly takes the form of, the Islamic Guardianship Council limiting who's allowed to participate in elections. In Saudi Arabia, they just have this like medieval monarchy. They gender apartheid. Yeah. I mean, so much more intense. I think the Saudis might have finally relented on women driving cars, but if so, that's like a very recent development.
Yeah, they did just recently, and everyone's kissing MBS's ass for that. But all the women who led a movement in Saudi Arabia of driving in civil disobedience are all still in jail. Like, all those activist women are locked the fuck up. But now I will allow this unbelievably modest reform, and Thomas Friedman can write column after column kissing my nuts over it. So that did change. Only, Ben, better 150 years late than never. That's what I say.
Exactly. And yeah, authoritarian enforcement of religious codes. Again, lots of that in Iran. Very, very bad, right? No, like I would be ferociously against all that, right? If I was an Iranian, I would have joined the protests. Saudi Arabia, right? The country that's on, Dershowitz's side of all this, like pretty recently executed somebody for sorcery, like within the last couple of American presidential administrations.
Oh, I forgot about that. Oh, that's so much better than all the other bits. That's so great. And they should look. There's a lot of Palantir that were never recovered. I mean, we should look at the prosecution's case, I guess, before we jump to conclusions.
Yeah. It's yeah. Do approach this like one of those old arguments about like police shootings. Well, did you watch the trial?
Yeah, you should look at the evidence there. They should do a Law and Order dramatization of that trial and see what evidence was brought. It's
yeah. Exactly.
That's great. Last thing I would just say about these idiots is like, Dershowitz is like, well, I'd prefer to just bomb them uncontrollably and illegally. It'd be much easier than regime change, but regime change if we have to. And Greenwald, again, the side of him that we all love so much, like, just immediately corners him and like, well, you would like regime change. He's like, well, of course, yes, I would like their government overthrown. Just a great moment to say real quick, last big regime change in Iraq. How many Iraqis were killed and had their lives ruined in the course of our regime change? Also, your society will be destroyed. Like, watch a guy make up a number at that stage. Like, this is, if you're going to advocate for this stuff, just great noting how utter lack of concern there is for the numerous dead Muslims that we killed in the course of fixing that last government that we said that we were just going to change it. You were going to swap it out real fast. Modular government. Oh, your country has no more bathrooms now. Sorry about that.
Yeah. I mean, Iraq, the Lancet study in 2006, right? So 3 years after the invasion, estimated something like 600,000 excess deaths wouldn't have happened if the invasion hadn't happened. Millions of people were either internal or external refugees. Sectarian civil war, the rise of ISIS, like all of those fun things happen, right? Because the Iraq War. Afghanistan, also famously a smash and success. And if you did what Dershowitz wants to do and completed that tic-tac-toe, right, of, Iraq, Afghanistan, right, Iran, then, Afghanistan, the Taliban never had anything like complete control over the whole country, right? It was always like, different warlords controlled different regions, and and they were, the sort of closest thing there was to an effective central government, but it really wasn't that close.
And there was big Pashtun majority provinces, but not outside those. Yeah, it was like not in control of the whole national territory by any means, as we read about it.
Yeah, and Iraq, by the time the invasion happened, they had lost a previous war. like brutally lost a previous war, right? The first Gulf War. Like they were just decimated by that war. And during the 12 years in between the first Gulf War and the invasion in 2003, they were under absolutely devastating embargo to stop that had the effect of stopping them from reconstructing from the previous war that they'd been defeated in. And also during those 12 years, we were like continuously bombing their air defenses. So compared to Afghanistan or Iraq, like those were like, I don't know, just bluntly, Iran is a real country with a real military.
Yeah, they could actually shoot up some planes down. Like it's not just we stand up there and throw Zeus lightning bolts and laugh. Like now, like they could actually harm us in some way. They can blow up some of our GIs in Israeli bases and Iraqi bases and shit.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So, like, yeah, if Dershowitz got his wish there, there's every reason to think like regime change in Iran, that would be like unfathomably worse than either Iraq or Afghanistan were. And also it was like, well, yeah, sure, I'd like regime change, but just mess around with a little bombing, see what happens. Like, yeah.
Oh, God, I'd love to just reorder your whole country that you all live in from my great perch up here by the side of God and the Virgin Mary. I'd love to just rearrange your society, but dovish people keep my wisdom from being used. God, it's just insufferable, imperious Ivy League douchebag. Just, we watched a lot of Alan minutes on this show. He's like a great one to go back to because you get all these like just insufferable bits. But gosh, at the end of the day, it's easy to forget. We took a couple weeks between these halves. Like it's easy to forget just how fucking intolerable these people are until you let them talk for a minute.
Yeah. I mean, this is. Like, it's so insane. Clearly the point of, let's do some bombing and see what happens, right? It's like, well, okay. And Iran will respond by doing nothing. Or if they do respond, you're going to want to stop it there and you're not going to want to keep going. Like,
People are very accustomed to Iraq and Afghanistan. It is true. And in Libya, like people are just so used to, we stomp on them and they go, Like, no, some countries actually have invested in militaries because we terrorize them all the time, and they have a military. We're very upset about it, but it exists. We could actually.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think Alan knows that the to put this in old timey Marxist terms, the fulfillment of his minimum program would lead to the fulfillment of his maximum program, right? We started having like a serious military confrontation with Iran. It wouldn't stop.
That is great. I like that. Yeah. Like I want to conquer the Chinese Forbidden Palace. That's it though. Yeah. We'll just take that and that'll become our new embassy base. And I mean, I'm sure that'll be the last we hear about that.
And they'll just lie down and take it. I'm
and they'll be like, fuck. Okay. That's probably what will happen to these insanely proud, power-hungry people who've risen to the top of their society's fucked up system. And
also, by the way, I guess last point for me, if you like start from the premise, it's like, yes, many, many things are terribly objectionable about the way Iran is or the way, whatever. We could pick one of the other countries that Alan Dershowitz wants to overthrow. I'm sure he has a list.
Yeah, we'll run out of them, yeah.
And I'm sure lots of bad, objectionable, authoritarian things, etc. But the question is like some sort of reform or revolution desirable, right? But should it be imposed from the outside by the 800-pound gorilla that smashes through societies?
It's destroyed societies all around it. Iran's surrounded by wreckage that we not even Israel, that we directly surrounded. Imagine that feeling. It's and they're so weird and authoritarian and controlling and paranoid. What happened there? They're crazy, I guess. We played no role in encouraging that.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say one of many good reasons to think that any kind of social change that might happen in this or any of the other societies might have within its sites is better off coming about internally than from the 182nd Airborne. Is that look, fucking listen to Alan Dershowitz, right? He's already put together his like fantasy football team of like who he wants to run these people's society for. What about the Shah's son? I met him. He's so good.
I know. That's so true. Like, I love the constant addition of the Shah's son. I've never heard such an association before, except by Alan, who was at some frigging New England event and got his ass kissed by the Ahmad Shalabi of Bangladesh, or whoever he's thinking of, or the Shah, Pahlavi Jr. in this case. Oh, God. He's got like some evil worm who kissed his ass, who he would like to see in a foreign ministry role in a future American appointed government of Iran or Pakistan or whomever.
Yeah, no, I met the grandson of the Shah's undersecretary for torture at Martha's Vineyard, and I would like to install him in some sort of role in the transitional government. He seems reasonable.
Oh God, that's. Well, I'm sure we've heard the last unreasonable remark out of Alan tonight. So,
your assertion that Iran is not a militant force in the world. Just ask the people of Lebanon. You live in Brazil. It is the #1 place for a Lebanese diaspora, and that's because Iran and its proxy Hezbollah has totally ruined life for the Lebanese. So here are my questions. One is, can you square the contradiction, Glenn, in two of your statements? One is that the United States, maybe Israel, have conspired to force Iran into desperation into pursuing a nuclear policy. You cited those statistics from the Washington Post. They now have 7,000 scientists and billions of dollars. There is a momentum, there is a desperation, and yet they're always so far away. They're so desperate that they're never going to get nuclear weapons. We always say they're going to get nuclear weapons. It never happens. Just like North Korea was. We always said they would get nuclear weapons, and guess what? They got nuclear weapons. So one is, as a debater, you don't have to be logically consistent, but will you at least acknowledge it's a logical inconsistency to say that Iran is so desperate to get the weapons, and yet you also paint a picture where they're not going to?
That's your question.
I have a question for Dershowitz.
Forgive me, sir. You only get one question. The question is put to Glenn. Answer the question, Glenn.
So first of all, you're extremely confused about the studies that I cited. They had nothing to do with Iran. The massive increase in the amount of money being spent to develop nuclear weapons and to hire scientists to develop nuclear weapons was not in Iran, but in Iraq. And all of that happened after the Israeli strike in 1981 on the Iraqi nuclear reactor. That is when Iraq decided that it needed nuclear weapons because there was a country in the region called Israel that had shown they believed in the right to attack any country that they want. Secondly, I didn't say that Iran has never exhibited any aggression. In fact, I said the opposite, that they definitely have. I said, however, that it is bizarre to me to be a citizen of the United States and to accuse other countries of being maniacal about war and constantly starting war when no country on the planet has started more wars or has pursued more wars over the last 50 years than the United States. What I was saying is, I was disputing Professor Dershowitz's attempt to depict Iran as this completely irrational, utterly apocalyptic, extremist regime, completely unhinged from any rational considerations, willing to blow up the entire world. Nothing suggests that they do that. In fact, their retaliation against Israel was far more constrained, the one we just saw, than most countries in the world would have launched after their embassy was bombed. It doesn't mean Iran is a good country or a nice country. It means that the depiction of them as this Nazi Germany, and I don't understand why, if he's saying they're not Nazi, if he's admitting now they're not Nazi Germany, why the whole beginning of his speech was wanting you to think what we should do if there was another Nazi Germany. Exactly, they're not Nazi Germany. And that's why the paradigm of, what we would do with Hitler, what would we do with Nazi Germany, is totally inapplicable, because we don't have another Nazi Germany in the Middle East. Like I said, every time they want you to start a new war, they tell you that this new leader is the new Hitler, and it never proves to be true.
Okay,
Can I respond to that, please?
Comment.
Can I respond to that? Okay.
Yes, and that's what we always do.
Greenwald said that that Iran knew that its drones would be intercepted. That is so preposterous. Iran could not have known that Jordan, that Saudi Arabia, that other countries would stop the drones. They intended to murder civilians all through Israel, including Arab civilians and Israeli civilians. And he says the reason was because Israel bombed the embassy. No, Israel didn't bomb the embassy. It bombed a building that was distantly associated with the embassy that was being used as a military headquarters. And let's remember who started that. Which is the first country that took over another country's embassy? I think it's called Iran. And it started with the Ayatollahs taking American prisoners, hostages, American diplomats hostages. So don't tell me that Iran deliberately sent a few kites up in order to somehow send a message to Israel, but it never intended to kill anybody. That's absurd. And Israel had the perfect right at that point, legally and morally, to retaliate overwhelmingly. Proportionality does not require, when somebody sends 300 rockets and drones, that you send 280. They could send 10,000 in response. What proportionality means is that when you're attacking a target that has both civilians and military, that you have to evaluate the military value of the target against the civilian casualties that were anticipated. Iran declared war on Israel by sending all those rockets. Thankfully, Israel, Jordan, the United States, and other countries deflected those and prevented all these deaths from occurring. But you cannot sit here and justify the claim that Iran did not want to kill Israelis, that it sent these hundreds of drones knowing they would all be miraculously stopped. Can you justify that?
Yeah, what I want to say is if Iran has such a primitive army that they're not capable of landing even a single missile inside Israel because all they have is a bunch of crappy drones and slow missiles that can be removed from the sky by Jordan and by the United Arab Emirates, then they're hardly an imposing country. The reality is that Hezbollah,
all you need is one to get through.
Alan, please.
One.
Hezbollah has hundreds of tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of highly sophisticated missiles pointed directly at every single major Israeli city, including Tel Aviv. If Iran wanted to do a kind of response against Israel that you're suggesting they wanted, they had that capability and they didn't, because they're a rational, restrained country that didn't want to end up in a world war. I know. The only rational, restrained countries are America, Israel, and the West. That's what your media tells you all the time. So I know that you believe that. But there are actually other rational, restrained countries in the world, too. You're always told there's a new Hitler in Iran. There's a new Hitler in Russia. There's a new Hitler named Hamas. There's a new Hitler in Syria. And you believe it all the time. And you stand up and you cheer all those evil, irrational countries. As I said, if you look at who the ones are who are starting wars, it is your country, the United States, and along with Israel as well. And that is just the reality if you remove yourself from Western propaganda.
Next question. Question here, please.
Right. After the U.S. assassinated Qasem Soleimani, many predicted that U.S. and Iran would get into a war. That would be disastrous, but that never happened. Why wouldn't it be the case that the U.S. can get away with taking out Iranian nuclear facilities without triggering a war?
I guess it's your question, Alan.
Oh, well, targeted killings are preferable, obviously, to mass killings. And if you can target the scientists who are about to endanger the civilians in your country without endangering civilians, that's far less undesirable than massive attacks. And Israel did manage to, and the United States did manage to kill people who are in charge of terrorism from countries. And Israel did manage to destroy the North Korean nuclear facility that had been sent to Syria with minimum damage and no retaliation. And so the idea that if the United States, with Israel's help, were to surgically destroy or postpone, you can never, you're right, you can never destroy completely, totally the potential for nuclear proliferation. But neither Iraq nor Syria has developed a nuclear bomb since they were destroyed by Israel. And if the United States were to surgically attack the 6 or 7 areas that are mostly far away and destroy the current nuclear potential arsenal, it could postpone the development of a nuclear arsenal by 10 years or 15 years. And that's an eternity when it comes to saving lives. So I still argue that that would be the least worst of the very bad alternatives that are facing the United States and Israel today.
Any comment from you, Glenn?
Okay, yeah, I just want to say, like, this is the contradiction at the heart of this propaganda to try and convince you to send your own government, your own military to go attack Israel enemy in the Middle East, which is, on the one hand, we're being told that Iran is this religiously extremist, apocalyptic, monstrous cult that just was willing to blow up the world. And yet, on the other hand, you're supposed to believe that if the United States just goes and drops a few bombs on Iran and takes out all their nuclear facilities, killing however many Iranians we kill, in the process, that they're just going to do nothing. They're just going to accept it and say, oh, I guess the United States bombed us. You remember, before the Iraq war, we were told that that war would end in a month or 2 months at the most. And we ended up fighting in Iraq for years. That is always what is done when they want you to convince you to do new wars. Oh, don't worry. It's just going to be a few people who die. It's going to be over very quickly. If Iran really is this great threat that he's telling you they are, this wildly irrational, crazed, religious extremist regime, don't you think that Iran will actually do some pretty extreme things in response to having the United States go and bomb it the way that we would do the same? Remember what happened we did after September 11th, a one-day attack on the United States. We launched 20 years worth of war in multiple Muslim countries all over the world. Why would Iran just sit by and accept our going and bombing their country without starting major instability and major war in the Middle East? There is always these contradictions at the heart of a war they want to sell you. It's like a used car. Oh, don't worry, this used car is fantastic. And then you get it and everything breaks down. That has been the case for every war they've sold you over the last 50 years.
There's a very simple answer. There's a very simple answer, and it's the answer you don't like. And that is, if the United States and Israel were to destroy Iran's nuclear arsenal in its current form, it would be a very important first step toward regime change. And regime change would bring about a glorious peace throughout the Middle East.
Okay.
That is impossible with Iran and the current regime in charge.
Just like happened with Iraq.
Let me finish. Let me finish. There is now a movement toward peace between Israel, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, possibly other countries as well. And if Iran were out of the picture, if the current regime were out of the picture, Israel could make peace with Lebanon. Israel could make peace with Iraq. It would be the best possible thing that could happen for world peace. Is it certain? Absolutely not. But is it fairly certain that if Iran remains in power and develops a nuclear arsenal, we're in for a catastrophic reaction in terms of not only the Middle East, but in many other parts of the world.
Next question.
The question is the risk-benefit ratio.
Okay.
I think this is a hard question. Glenn thinks it's an easy question. If you agree with him, it's an easy question. Vote for him.
All right. Next question.
Good evening, gentlemen. My question is for Professor Dershowitz.
I was going to keep going and watch another question first, but I got to pause on regime change in Iran leading to a glorious period of peace throughout the region.
Like that got like people like you just heard the laugh in the crowd. Like you like it like, and this seems like it's a reasoned debate, relatively conservative sounding crowd. That's like like the audible laughter from crowds should appear in the transcript at that point.
Unbelieving laughter crowd would definitely be what should go in the transcript. Astounded laughter. Yeah, no, absolutely. So Iran, with a vastly more formidable military than any country that the United States has gone to war with since, I'm not sure, Long time. Like, and
much more able to defend itself than Vietnam. So that's actually a good question. I don't know.
yeah, right, because it's like the runner-up has got to be North Vietnam, right? Like that's so as far as like the time period from the 1960s to present. Like I don't know. Yeah, that's a little hard. So I mean, I guess China, because the U.S. and China both had troops in Korea.
Yeah, that was basically a U.S.-China war. Yeah, Ender is correct. You could say Korea. Yeah, that's probably your most plausible post-World War II itself bet. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, so at least like 70 years since the United States has fought with a country that has as much capacity to defend itself as Iran has, even if we're just talking internally to Iran, of course, as Alan himself is keen to emphasize when it's convenient to him. Iran has all of these regional proxies and allies. So are they just going to sit out the war, or does this glorious period of peace only start when all of them have been thoroughly defeated also?
God, glorious period of peace. Like this was like, this was recently. This was after that Iranian-Israeli confrontation of a couple weeks ago. This is not that old. Like this is after like Libya is in front of Dershowitz too. Like just complete annihilation of land. They did nothing. That was becoming more on our side. We were like, oh, rebellion, kick this land to shit, and we sure did. It's pretty stunning to see. I do enjoy that. But I like, that was kind of interesting. Like I like how Glenn went after that, like, not defending Iran's like authoritarian, cruel regime, but saying like it's not an insane animal. Like it is not the Third Reich, which has a whole design to conquer the entirety of a continent. So it's like, well, Israel did blow up one of their embassies, and how nice is that sophistry too? It wasn't an embassy; it was a diplomatically related building that is totally cool to blow up the civilians in that. So you're saying it's not even an embassy, and they blew up those civilians. And then Iran comes on with this, very mild, retaliation of drones and relatively slow flying missiles. And I love Dershowitz's like indignation. How could Israel have known that Iran was going to attack after that not embassy destruction that everyone went, oh, they blew up one of their non-embassies. I guess that's what the world said. Like, how are they supposed to know? Like, it's well known. Like, it was in the Wall Street damn Journal that Iran alerted all the intermediate countries that it was going to send ordnance through their airspace 72 hours before the event. How could they have known, Alan? The people in the audience will be reading newspapers. These people are into it. They're going to know.
I'm pretty sure Iran was not sending its most advanced weapons. And again, as Glenn points out, if they were, then gosh, that doesn't sound like a big threat. But
like the whole thing is that they have all this huge arsenal. Oh, even these non-nuclear rockets are a huge threat to America and Europe and Israel. And yet then Israel shoots down everything with its buddies. So either they're a fucking threat or they're not. And then if they are a threat but didn't do this, I guess they're capable of like careful, proportionate response. I would just throw in quickly that when we all watched that crazy dance between Iran and Israel there, like a couple weeks before, Iran had this episode with Pakistan where Pakistan, I think it was a drone strike on some Pakistani, like Baluchistani separatists who were in Iranian territory, like blowing up people in Iran. And there was, some concern there could be war between these countries. So Iran retaliates, killing some of its own rebels in Pakistani territory. And then both countries announced that they believe in peace and negotiating things out. Like both countries, like Pakistan went after rebels. And so Iran carefully mirrored it and they shook hands. Like this is the kind of like twisted dance of death that these countries engage in. Like Glenn, I think Greenwald had a subtle point there by bringing that up. This country actually does subtle, careful shit all the time. You can't just paint them as a giant gorilla that inhabits the Middle East.
Yeah, which is actually, by the way, as far as I can tell, is how most military confrontations between most countries work most of the time. That like you do, like even if one country does something and another country responds, that doesn't necessarily mean that you just keep it up to DEFCON 5 because in most national settings you have like have to worry about your capacity to sustain that. And so, you know, at a certain point you come down off the ledge in a way that like the United States has been less likely to do over the decades, because when you are the 800-pound gorilla, you know, if somebody, you know, chucks a pebble at you, you know, just stomp them. Like I remember, I, you know, probably told this on air before, but like I remember 12 years ago, I was living in South Korea, and there were joint U.S. South Korean exercises on this island that was in dispute between North and South Korea, and the North Koreans bombed it, which was basically both countries were in the middle of leadership transitions and felt like they had something to prove. And this was on the North Korean side. This was probably a crazy overreaction anyway. They could have just, you know, they could have like lodged a protest that, you know, would have like escalated tensions much less than this. But they bombed the island. Several people died. A ton of people you know, fled from Seoul. And Seoul is very close to the North Korean border, down, you know, south for the weekend. And basically the South Koreans fired a few rounds back and said, don't do it again. And that was kind of that. And I remember the next day talking to my students about this, and I was like, yeah, you have to understand how weird this is to me as an American. Like when I
de-escalation, I thought those escalators only went one way. You could go down on. Oh, wow.
Yeah. When I was a little kid, Ronald Reagan invaded Grenada, and the official explanation was they're building an airport, and like you never know.
What's with this rural airstrip? Pretty suspicious. Maybe 9 billion tons of bombs will fix that problem. Yeah, that is pretty rich. But yeah, it is nice. Yeah, it's great with Korea, that example too. Like watching actual countries that sort of believe in give and take among their other shitty authoritarian neighbors. Like none of these countries are anything to write home about. Even the republics like India have like all these twisted evil problems and shit.
Sure.
Like it shows like countries actually can like go along and get along. Like there are things that can be done. That's of course, you know, in the West, it's we'll lock you out of the world economy and pour fucking white phosphorus onto you until you yield. It is interesting to see countries like do that kind of just negotiation there. The only other thing I wanted to mention was I just love how Dershowitz is saying like, well, you know, of course I don't want regime change as a first resort. As a second resort, it's totally fine and great and will create an era of peace, which you're all going to believe. But like he says, like it's better just to do some targeted killings, which we used to call assassinations, but that sounds bad. So we don't assassinate Soleimani and these Iranian nuclear scientists and the Iraqi nuclear workers. It's targeted killings. That Hamas did assassinations. That's very terrible when they do that.
No, I mean, I'm sure if like
because those are civilian. I just want to remind people like nuclear power is legal. Like it's a nuclear power program until you prove it's for nuclear weapons, which we don't do because we give Iran nothing but incentives to throw out the inspectors. So now who fucking knows because of our actions. But it's great to see that because like those are civilian nuclear scientists until you prove they're not. You're assassinating civilians in a poor country that put a lot of resources into training some physicists so they can have a nuclear fuel rod that will keep a fucking light on in the country. And your response is to blow their fucking head off because maybe one day they'll have the nukes that we have 6,000 of.
No, I'm sure if Iran killed a few scientists who work for the Pentagon, that we wouldn't make a big deal of it.
It's
right?
not an assassination.
It's a little.
It's not like they assassinated a guy.
Yeah, like, no, they just targeted and killed some guys. It's fine.
We did.
It's not a big deal. Just like I'm sure if Iran or Russia or China bombed a building that, you know, technically it was okay. It was a U.S. diplomatic building, but technically it was kind of next door to the embassy. It was like there was like an adjacent building that was somewhat connected to it.
God.
Like,
it's not in the White House. It's the wing on the side of it. This is not a aggressive act.
yeah,
We left part of it.
yeah, calm down, guys. I'm sure that our response to that would have been much more moderate than saying, "Hey, we're going to send our slowest moving drones in 72 hours. So,
Yeah,
if you guys want to do something here, right? Which like really seems like, honestly, like despite, I mean, again, I think that Dershowitz wants to yank Iran's chain enough to get them to like respond in a big way to therefore justify an even bigger American response. Because what he actually wants is a full-on war and regime change so he can have his glorious period of peace. But like, honestly, it's an incredibly restrained response. I mean, this is like, you pretty much can't not respond, like kind of given the rules as they're, the rules of the game is the current.
People want reaction, right or wrong. Like people want to see that response. We all talk about that in Western wars all the time.
So when you're like, oh, we are very, very slowly firing some stuff at you. I don't know. I mean, I'm just going to tell you because there's probably nothing you can do about it in the next 72 hours. But
you're going to go out 72 hours. Like a lightning strike will commence.
Yeah, it's the.
Call it a fortnight. You know what? Call it a fortnight. Let's not rush into this.
I mean, yeah, this is the. The Simpsons. No, they're very slowly getting away, right? Like, come on. Like, this is the most symbolic military response in the face of it. I know also it's like, okay, if they were really bound and determined to do some damage, not just save face by having had some kind of
kill all these Israeli civilians, like really, but you admit they're not using their main arsenal. It's confusing.
Yeah, why didn't they use their main arsenal? Why did they give the warning? Why, in fact, when all this stuff was shot down, did they not keep going?
Why are you still given positions in media where we have to watch your debates? That's the real enigma here. Who's listening to this man and his Zionist hosiery?
Yeah, which is also amazing. I keep thinking about it because, like Glenn does keep playing up the Israel angle, and I keep which I wouldn't have. I would just sort of. Because I do think that there are, motivations for the sort of projection of American imperial military power in the Middle East that have nothing to do with the Alliance for Israel. That's certainly in the picture. And I keep expecting Dersh to get indignant about it, but he keeps leading into it.
Yeah, he's the one who keeps bringing it up and making it about Israel. Like he's the one who's doing it. It's true. He's like,
yes, no, that would be very good for Israel if this happens. Like, man, you are not making your case here. That like this is because this is also like let's be real clear about this. I don't know, man. I mean, even in just sort of pure nationalistic terms, what you were advocating for, right? The thing that you acknowledge would be your sort of long-term hope that you want to have happen here would mean like an awful lot of American kids, coming back in, flag draped coffins, a la the scenes that we all remember with such fondness from the Bush years. And, they would not be the children by and large of people who Alan meets at, Martha's Vineyard and, Harvard and Little St. James and wherever else wherever else
someone's got a kid in officer school or something, and maybe.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to meet the rank and file, predominantly blue collar constituency of the U.S. Armed Forces. Like that's very true. And again, that gets back to that thing we said before too. He's like, no, it would be very good for the people of Iran, much as I am helping the people of Iraq and Libya with the interventions that I create media umbrellas of support for. Like it helps these people very much. Don't look into what's happening there now, but it's much better. Like just this like high-handed, unbelievably phony benevolence. Like they don't want you to do what's best for them, Alan. It always ends up with them getting blown up and not having fresh water anymore.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, I don't know. If I were making this case that yes, it's good for a bunch of your children to die in Iran, I would try a little bit harder to pretend that it would serve your interests somehow. not just like this other country that's also on the other side of the world. But,
Right. Then they're going to send rockets at us because they know we won't do anything.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it touches on some of the necessary practicalities. The Iranian nuclear facilities like Natanz are deeply, deeply buried.
Yeah.
Quite possibly beyond the reach of conventional ordnance.
That's right.
And if the only reliable way, as you said, was to strike them, would you be willing to see the U.S. conduct a nuclear first
No.
strike,
No.
undoubtedly resulting in fallout spread by the prevailing winds?
No, absolutely not. I don't think either Israel or the United States should have a first strike nuclear attack. And that's why Israel asked the United States for bunker busting bombs that are conventional, but that can burrow through the ground and destroy the vast majority of the potential arsenal. Would it be complete? Of course not. But I would never favor either the United States or Israel taking a first nuclear step unless it were absolutely necessary to their self-preservation.
Then how would you get at those facilities that he just referenced were so far underneath the
Bunker
surface that
busting
no?
bombs.
Okay, so let me just say that you can paint a very glorious, optimistic, sunny picture of any war. And what I would hope you will do is look at all the studies that I read that said what caused more than anything else a desire for nuclear weapons in the Middle East was when Israel did the kind of strike that he's talking about doing in Iran, in Iraq, because the more you signal to
No, that's not
countries
true.
that they are going to be vulnerable without nuclear weapons, that is when they say, oh, if I were North Korea, they wouldn't be attacking me. If I were Pakistan, they wouldn't be attacking me because they have nuclear weapons. That's what provides this nuclear arms race, is creating a militarized world.
That's just dead wrong historically. The reason the Saudis want a nuclear arsenal now is to protect themselves against Iran. If Iran didn't have nuclear potential and be just months or who knows away from a nuclear arsenal, the Saudis would not be asking for it and the Emirates would not be asking for it. So it's exactly the opposite.
Next
And,
question. Next question.
a world without nuclear weapons. And you talked before about how everybody voted for a nuclear-free zone except the United States and Israel. Of course, because the United States and Israel are the only countries in the Middle East that have nuclear weapons. What do you expect? Of course, countries without nuclear weapons are going to vote for a nuclear-free zone. That doesn't take a lot of intelligence.
Next
right.
question.
Yeah, this question is for Alan Dulles. Alan Dershowitz. So considering we have 30,000 U.S. troops, service men and women in the Middle East, in Jordan, Syria, Iraq, UAE, how many of these service men and women are you willing and comfortable to sacrifice for Israel?
I'm not going to
in the
answer.
immediate retaliation that Iran is definitely going to take, and with its militias in the region against our U.S.
I'm sorry.
service men and women in the region.
You have forfeited your right to ask me a question by calling me Alan Dulles. I'm not going to respond to name calling. I was a strong opponent of
Those
both
are the rules.
Dulles brothers, and I'm simply not going to dignify your absurd ad hominem question with a serious answer. Who's next?
I don't support that ad hominem, but I do want to make a comment about the substance just very quickly, which is that when I keep talking about what happened with the Iraq War, I just want everyone to remember that Iran is a country 3 times as large, with far more sophisticated military capabilities, not just inside Iran, but all throughout the Middle East. And if you thought that the Iraq War was going to last 2 weeks and you saw it last for 15 years because of the willingness of people to react when their own country is attacked and bombed and defended, what Iraq was able to do was a tiny fraction of what Iran will be able to do and likely will do all throughout the Middle East, including, as the questioner suggested, where our own soldiers are. This is a fantasy war he's selling you and not the real war, as we've seen throughout history over and over. It's so easy to make claims about the future, but none of it has ever happened in the past. We've never had a dream war like the one he's selling
That
you. So
assumes-
please look at history and
that
see what happens when we do these things.
That assumes no regime change. If you have regime change,
Well-
you have a different situation. The
Next
United
question.
States bombed Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Berlin, and we had regime change.
Next
And
question. Yeah.
Suddenly, the America's 2 greatest allies were Germany and Japan. And so, yes, you can defeat an ideology, and yes, you can defeat a regime and bring about peace by the right surgical military approach.
Next question.
Hey, this question is for Glenn. Let's say that an Iran deal did in the past or could in the future actually work as intended. The last time around, it didn't stop the IRGC from murdering political dissidents, raping women as political punishment, and hanging gay people from ropes in the town square. So how would you reconstitute a deal that didn't condemn these people to living under a regime that, according to the people actually living under it, does in fact feel a lot like a tyrannical, fundamentalist, Nazi-like regime?
So I guess I would say to you that if you think the United States should go around the world changing all the regimes that are extremely barbaric and repressive to its people, we shouldn't only do Iran. Some of the countries that are
No, but how
closest,
about ones that
some of the
export
countries that are
terrorism?
closest,
Alan, let him
to-
finish his answer.
some of the countries that are closest
Alan,
to the
you'll-
United States, the ones that he has been citing as the good countries, the one he wants to replicate, like Saudi Arabia.
They
I will
export terrorism.
go look at how dissidents are treated in Saudi Arabia. Do you think women are well treated in Saudi Arabia? Do you think gay people are treated well in Saudi Arabia? Or go look at Egypt, where dissidents are murdered by the hundreds or the thousands. There's zero press freedom. There's not a single dissident in Egypt that is anything but arrested or killed. So this idea that the United States is going to go around the world and we're going to take out the bad regimes, even though some of our closest allies and partners always have been and still are some of the most savage regimes in the world. Can I just
put your
finish? And then you
finger
can
on the
talk?
precise
Can I just
question?
finish? Let me just finish, and then you
Alan, you'll get your moment to respond.
You've had a lot of moments. I think it's an important point, because if you think that the reason to go bomb Iran is because they're an oppressive government, then we should go bomb a lot of countries in the world, be the world's policeman, take out all of the countries. Iran is by far not the most repressive regime on the planet. They're extremely repressive. You do not want to be a dissident in Iran, that's for sure. But there are a lot of countries that are at least as bad, if not worse, including the ones that he wants to replicate in the Middle East. The reality is he doesn't care, and the U.S. government doesn't care if a country is dictatorial or tyrannical. We have supported and installed dictatorial regimes all throughout the world. We don't care if a country is free. What we care about is whether the dictatorship serves the interests of Israel and the United States.
So
and that is what regime change is about.
You put your finger. You put your finger on the precise question. In a world where we judge things not by good, better, best, but by worse, worser, worsest, and unbelievably bad, the question is, what's worse? A country like Saddam Hussein's, where he oppresses its own people, and which is terrible. And we shouldn't have gone to war with Saddam Hussein. We went against the wrong country. It should have been Iran, or a country which exports terrorism around the world. And if you're going to be a policeman, you don't police people for what they do to their own citizens. There are courts for that. There are international courts. But you do make sure that countries can't hurt you and can't hurt your allies. And the difference between Iran and Iraq, or between Iran and Saudi Arabia, is Iran is the greatest exporter of terrorism in the history of the world. It's trying to hurt us. It's trying to hurt its neighbors. It's trying to hurt its allies. Whereas other dictatorships just work internally. All they want to do, even North Korea, all it cares about is preserving its little hermit empire. But they're not a great danger to us. Iran is a great, great danger to the United States, to Israel, to the countries in the Middle East, and to world peace. And if you can't understand the difference between countries that endanger others and countries that just endanger themselves. Now, if you endanger people as well, if you have a combination, if you have three things going for you: one, you're repressive of your own people. Two, the people themselves want regime change. They want to see the Ayatollahs thrown out. And three, they pose a great danger to other people. That trifecta is the perfect recipe for regime change, not to try to protect people from themselves. No, we shouldn't have regime change in Saudi Arabia because they don't endanger us or the people around them. But we should have regime change in Iran because they fit those three criteria.
Can I just very quickly, I'm sorry, I want to get to all the questions just very quickly. I'm so glad he's finally saying that what he really wants you to do is to vote for regime change. And there's a lot of there's a lot of examples of what happens when we try and redo regime change. We were told we were going to go and make Iraq a better place. We were going to make Libya a better place. We were going to make Syria a better place. If you want to see the results of what really happens when the United States goes in and tries to change the regime of other countries, and those are much less powerful and smaller countries than Iran, go look at Iraq, go look at Libya, go look at Syria, and then you decide whether you want to replicate that yet again in the Middle East.
In Iran, the answer is yes. You do want to do that in Iran.
Apologies to those people who are still in line. This, unfortunately, will have to be our final question. Go ahead. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. So look, ever since post FDR, we've had a policy of kind of advocating for a first strike. After FDR died and we built the nuclear bomb, Bertrand Russell actually advocated for the United States to bomb the Soviet Union before they were able to develop the nuclear bomb as a way of proving moral superiority. And then you've had people like Henry Kissinger afterwards who in their NSSM 200 blankly call for depopulation and that the United States has to take the role of starting wars and coups around the world.
What's your question?
To keep the population in check.
What's your question? What is your question?
Here's my question. We are influenced by neoconservative thinking of what you're saying that we need to attack first. Therefore, don't you think Putin should attack the United States first, given that, we're funding and arming Ukraine? So doesn't your logic, Mr. Dershowitz, also apply to the other countries that we are going after? And also, I want to answer to the question.
Excuse me. We heard your question.
Okay. How many men and women would you commit, American soldiers would you commit?
Sorry, your question has been asked, sir.
No, it's a hard point. Obviously, we do have, great risks when we engage in any kind of preemptive or preventive attack. That always is the case. What I'm here to tell you is that there are great risks in not taking preemptive and preventive action. Those great risks were manifested by the outbreak of the Second World War, which was eminently preventable if we had just enforced the Versailles Treaty. And so I think we have to always carefully balance when we take preventive action. And the three criteria that I have talked about, it seems to me, satisfy those concerns.
Okay,
namely,
you mentioned those.
Make sure the people themselves in the country want regime change. You have to make sure that the people in the country are deeply, deeply oppressed, and you have to make sure that the country is posing a great, great risk to others. And yes, there is the possibility that if you establish prevention as a paradigm, other countries will do the same. I'm about to publish a book called The Preventive State, How to Avoid Cataclysmic Events Without Giving Governments Too Much Power. And I go through all these issues about when it's appropriate to take preventive action. And I acknowledge it's a difficult question. The difference between us is I acknowledge it's hard and difficult and nuanced, and my distinguished opponent seems to think
okay, I'm going to do something politically incorrect and announce that we have an Iranian in the House who would like to ask the final question. Take it away, Miss
Thank you so
Miss
much
Iran.
for making the exception for me. My question actually has a few different sides. I'm probably one of the just few, if not the only Iranian here tonight.
It's only one question, please.
Yes, of course. My question is about your statement that Iran is a rational country and they would do something that is rational. I actually do believe you're right. What I have in mind is your understanding of the rationality. They are the enemy of the United States as they are the enemy of Israel. It's not one way or another. It's both of them. I was personally took out of my schoolyard in front of 300 people just because I didn't chant this to America when I was 13 years old. So are they a rational country? Yes, they are. But are you going to like the rational? I'm assuming not.
I think your question has been clear. It's intended for Mr. Greenbaum or Greenwald. Yes, go ahead.
So obviously, every time the United States wants to attack a new country, there are always dissidents or exiles from those countries. We constantly heard from Iraqi exiles during the run up to the war in Iraq who would appear and say, I hate my government. And they often hated their government for very good reason. That does not change the fact. And I have no doubt that people who live in Iran are repressed. I mean, that is not even a debatable point. Just like
My
people,
question is
Oh,
not
sure.
about
Excuse me,
the
miss,
I'm gonna get
people,
to your
it's
point.
about the rationale.
I'm gonna get to your
Miss-
point.
Because your argument
Miss-
is
I'm gonna get to
based
your
on the
point.
fact that there are
Please.
rationals. They're
Miss,
not.
Miss, you asked your question. Yeah. Okay.
If there are all kinds of repressive regimes in the world that will produce exiles. You can hear from Saudi exiles, you can hear from Egyptian exiles, you can hear from Emirati exiles, you can hear from exiles from South America and from Asia and all over the world, people who leave their country and say that their government is repressive, and it's absolutely true. The problem is that war, going around bombing every country, trying to change every other government that we think is bad, or that people stand up and say, I'm from that country and is bad, like we heard from Iraqi exiles, does not lead to better outcomes. You can sell the war that way. You can say, oh, we're going to go to war. We heard this, all the same stuff from Saddam Hussein. He repressed his people. He exported terrorism in the Middle East. We need to change his government. Once we change his government, there's going to be democracy flourishing all throughout the Middle East. We ended up killing close to 1 million Iraqis, if not more, and lost tens of thousands of people either to casualties or to death from our own country, none of which was told to the American people before they sold that war as well. So yes, you can hear and it's not just Iraq, by the way. It was the war in Libya, which we were told we're just going into, but put a no-fly zone over Benghazi. We changed that regime. We turned away and left, and that country ended up with anarchy and slavery and all kinds of migrant crises. We destroyed Syria with the CIA war, where we fought on the same side as Al-Qaeda and ISIS because there were Syrian exiles saying Assad is the greatest dictator. We were told, no, Assad is the new Hitler. This is propaganda that is given to you over and over and over. And I think our responsibility as Americans is to finally say, we are not supporting more wars in the name of this propagandistic framework.
I'm sorry. We've gone over time with the Q&A. We're going to go to the summation portion of the evening. Each side gets 5 minutes to summarize. And according to the rules, the affirmative goes first. Take it away, Alan. 5 minutes of summary.
Oh, great stuff. Pretty good, you know. I like, you know, Greenwald having got Dershowitz to commit to the defensive regime change. I mean, there's a lot of goofy shit in there. The thing I would just point to is like Dershowitz, you know, he's getting humiliated. You know, Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan. These names are all synonymous with endless, expensive, murderous disasters. So he goes, aha, Japan and Germany. Those countries are now our closest allies. And what did that was easy. All it took was the complete destruction of their countries and gigantic loss of population, setting them back 30 years of recovery. But it's like those countries were completely annihilated by us with what are now considered war crimes under laws that we wrote, and took decades of occupation, and we just rewrote their constitutions like that. And then at the end of that sentence, at the end of that bit, he goes, and so that's what we could do with the surgical approach. A surgical approach. That's what I would, when I look at the firebombing of Tokyo, I think, very difficult. This bullet is very close to his heart. It's a very difficult, delicate surgical maneuver here. Oh, we missed a neighborhood. Okay, we burned that neighborhood down. You know, that's similar to this tumor that's in a very inaccessible part of this guy's brain. Very similar. It's good that, you know, Greenwald didn't have to do much to get Dershowitz defending just ludicrously unpopular propositions about major aggressive wars. But that's how far back you have to reach, I guess, is what that's sort of teaching me. For a U.S. regime change success story is fucking World War II, the one that everyone reaches for any kind of feel-good U.S. Military feeling. That's nice. The only other thing I want to comment on is how annoying Epstein is. I don't have to tell you, Ben, after your numerous structured run-ins with him. I just love how the whole debate, Dershowitz just walks over Epstein's remarks for a new question or to stop interrupting, completely castrates Epstein the whole time. And Epstein finally loses his temper and takes it out on the audience members several times. Like suddenly there's serious.
He sounded like, I was a little worried about him there. Like he sounded like he was very upset at the audience, and it could not possibly be good for his heart rate. I'm going to give some free advice to the Soho Forum. Like, upgrade your technology so you can just cut people's mics.
We can just cut, or do the thing where it drops a lot and you speak over them. Yeah, because otherwise, like, they're assholes. Like, if it's going to be compatible like this, if the moderator, either you can control the audio or you can't. Like, that's like more important than the debate format is like the audio technical shit in this. Like, it's amazing. So I don't know, a lot to enjoy there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that saying, oh, sometimes things do go well, what about Japan and Germany? It's like, okay, so you're talking in that case about fighting a literal world war, right? The entire world was at war for several years. And as you point out, that included, right, to like pacify the populations of those countries, like that included dropping multiple nuclear weapons.
Yeah, like one of them took nukes and the other one took Russia to stop. Like, that's what it took. Like, it takes like the most powerful forces in the world, like major other military powers, nuclear weapons, and then you. And like
also, if we're shopping around for analogies for like what like a regime change in Iran would look like, it's like, yeah, we could go back to the 1940s and these completely different parts of the world.
Is that far enough back?
Or we could look at the multiple decades-long wars that we waged with two of Iran's immediate neighbors that like just ended 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, like, aren't those more relevant, Alan? Aren't we more likely to do interventions on that scale than complete annihilation of Japan and nuking it? Like, isn't that being realistic, Alan? Or is realism not what you like really want here? I mean, that's pretty great. I know the best part of this bit, though, I take it back, of this last segment, was Alan saying it was terrible after 9/11. Iraq, that was wrong. We went to the wrong country. Should have been Iran. See, it's a switcheroo. See, he fools you because you think he's going to say Afghanistan, like every liberal says, oh, Afghanistan, that's where we should have had our boys, blowing up people who have no involvement in this shit. That's what we should have done. But no, it's a switcheroo. It should have been the most uninvolved country in the region, the Shiite country. Who do they hate the most? Oh, the extreme Sunnis of Al-Qaeda, who are credited with 9/11. Like, just about the stupidest. But, like, that's a classic. That's like a new Alan classic there. That's a great, he keeps you guessing.
Yeah, which is particular. Yeah, actually, I didn't even think about that. I mean, when he said that, I was just thinking, yep, there we go. Everybody's always, retroactively against the last war. They're just in favor of the new war. That's
this
like
next one.
Actually, still a live
will be
proposition,
liberators this time. Yes, that's
yeah, exactly. But you're right. Like, actually, what he said is objectively much more fucking insane than I was thinking. Because it's like, no, he's suggesting that we should have responded to 9/11 by attacking Iran, which, as you say, the sectarian and ideological enemies of the people who did 9/11, which, by the way, talk about 9/11, there's quite a bit of evidence that's emerged over the years that there are elements of the Saudi security apparatus.
More. Yeah, amazing that that's still dribbling out after all these years. Yeah.
Yeah.
Catching Iran's exporting terrorism is so dangerous. Like, Saudi Arabia is who you're thinking of, dude. Like, Iran has these militias. Saudi Arabia has a worldwide, like, madrasa and, like, arms trade, network. Like, that is the much richer, larger Iran that's not locked out of the world economy because it's friends with the West.
Yeah, that's exactly. And, like, honestly, yeah. So, yes, the enemies, the people who did it, and the enemies of the country that was ambiguously somewhat complicit with it. And in fact, nobody fucking remembers this, but Iran was kind of ambiguously, at least on the American side of the war in Afghanistan. Like, I think Iran let the U.S. use their airspace to, to fly into Afghanistan because they fucking hate those people.
Yeah, happy to see some giant assholes Sunnis be, for the moment, under the American thumb. It'll be us again soon enough. Yeah, like that's pretty damn rich with that comparison too. And I guess we ought to comment before this final sequence. We should comment on the Alan Dulles moment, which is confusing. Call him Alan Dulles instead of Dershowitz. I laughed. I LOL'd here with my mic off audience, so like that happened, but. And then Dershowitz goes, how dare you? I'm not going to dignify that.
You can understand why he was. Look, you can understand why he was so offended at being compared to Alan Dulles. Alan Dulles as head of CIA, masterminded the regime change in 1953 that imposed the Shah, and Alan Dershowitz wants to impose the Shah's son. So you see, they're very different. Very different.
I think of it that way. So it's like the prince and the king's advisors fighting. I didn't think about it that way. Oh my god, it's just so offensive.
It's so fucking cheap too. It's like he's like pretending to be indignant about the Alan Dulles joke, and
but then he says he liked Alan Dulles, so it's like you should like the thing you would say there is, oh well, I actually take that as a compliment because nah. But of course he says, I'm not going to answer. The question actually was, how many Iranian dead would you consider acceptable for your regime change? Because they always killed giant numbers of people. And Alan's first words are, I'm not going to answer that question. And sitting here, I was like, yeah, I bet you're fucking not. That's the question that I was paying so much to ask you. It's a question you don't want to answer. Because again, like toward the end there too, he says, Greenwald, it's all black and white to Greenwald. He's very simple and doesn't support dropping bombs on weird other people. But it's really difficult. It's hard, and we struggle with this issue. He says, in intervention, we always face great risk. Do we always face great risk, Alan? Yeah. I actually don't feel like I'm at that much risk. I actually feel fairly safe, and I know you are, Moneybags. I think it's the people in the country who you're bravely deciding we should help by destroying their country like we destroyed all these others. I think they're the ones taking the risk, Alan. You look very safe to me in your Martha's Vineyard summer home. You look very secure to me there.
I don't think Alan is actually worried that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard is going to blow up Martha's Vineyard in response to U.S. intervention. I think that the people who are put at risk are mostly Iranians, people who are going to be like sitting at home in their apartments in Tehran when the missiles come down, and distant second, but much more than Alan, people who are like, from Detroit and Flint and Milwaukee, who were sold the army as like a college scholarship program.
College is very expensive.
Those are the people who'd be put at risk if he got his wish here.
Work on our submarine, we'll send you to school. Like people, I know some people would scoff at that. Really, people go for the money. I'm like, fucking yeah.
Oh my god.
Rent still comes in money. People will do almost anything for money. Rent, you still have to have money. They didn't retire that. Yes, they do it for money. And you get a career out of that, very naturally. At least in some cases, at least that's the idea. Pretty rich. Like those are the people who will be at stake.
Look, if you're going to start asserting that the desire for money is a major motivation for human behavior, then I don't know what to tell you. Like that, like I know you're supposed to be some kind of fancy economics professor, but that just sounds like nonsense to me.
Yeah, I was just kidding when I said that.
Yeah, exactly. Look, people, people join the U.S. military for reasons that have nothing to do with economics or college or anything like that. It's just
they're very concerned about women's rights in developing world countries that they could totally say the names of without training. For sure, that's why they do because they're concerned about Afghan women and their welfare.
Yeah. Last point about this. I guess maybe we should. We're almost done, but I guess maybe we should go to the post game to watch the closing statement
for the dramatic courtroom summation sequence.
Yeah, exactly. But last thing, last thing from me before that, it's just kind of. I don't want to let escape from comment that that Iranian woman at the very end of the Q&A, who she started her question with, well, you say the Iran nuclear deal worked, but it didn't stop. And then she just lists off a bunch of stuff that has absolutely nothing to do with Iran's nuclear program. It didn't stop Iran from being like a bad repressive regime is basically what she's saying.
Yeah, it's not the Iranian Comprehensive Reform Treaty. Like we don't call it that.
Yeah, it was the Iran nuclear deal, right? I mean, this is like, it's like, yeah, and like, and like what? SALT 2 didn't create multi-party elections in the Soviet Union. That wasn't what it was ever pitched for, right? Like,
how did SALT 2 help the Anita Hill hearings? It didn't. So therefore, anything you would say that's good about it is dumb.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, yeah, it's a non-proliferation treaty. It has absolutely nothing to do with this. And yeah, the idea that like you can only do non-proliferation treaties with countries that have political systems you approve of pretty much guarantees that you're going to be in a permanent state of escalation, with anybody that you're ideologically opposed to, which doesn't sound like a world that I particularly want to live in. But also, like, I don't know. I mean, if you want a situation where you have the best shot of internally generated social change in a country like Iran, I would actually think that not having that country be up against the wall with like its leaders being able to claim that there's like a credible threat of the dominant, military hegemon on the entire planet crushing them at any moment would actually create conditions that would be a little bit more conducive to that.
Yeah, completely. And like it connects to what Greenwald said, which is so compelling. Like it's watching countries get annihilated and kicked to pieces by giants that makes these countries like want to get a large conventional deterrent or a nuclear one, maybe, anything to keep themselves from just being regime changed gently through surgical World War II like means out of existence. Like Greenwald's right about that. Like it's our interventions that drive proliferation. And similarly for like the autocratic repression, like once it becomes clear that our wars aren't fixing this, you go to, well, Iran's very bad. Russia, they're free there. That's bad. Like, oh, okay, we should go to war with every country. That usually half the time it's our fault that they're bad. There's some point in the past where they had a republic and we destroyed it, like with Iran in 53. Yeah. Many such cases, as we say now. Like it's completely correct. I remember we mentioned this in the first part of the video. Like when you listen to like reformers, like pro-Western even reformers in countries like Iran and all these countries that we're hostile toward, they say like it's harder for us in the electoral and political environment here with your constant threats and saber rattling and claims you're about to come and bomb us. Every time Lindsey Graham goes, every option's on the table. That's technically that's threatening violence. Technically, that's against the Nuremberg laws. Like that is the shit that makes it impossible for them to have, like, you don't help them have freedom when you give their authoritarian government a very clear, like, yes, we're trying to bomb and overthrow you again and install whatever crazy, son of Ahmed Shalabi that we want to install in your country. Like that's, if we would stop with the nonstop hawkish military threats, that's how you encourage reforms in countries where they aren't afraid that they need some Winston Churchill or, or Ayatollah type to protect them against the giant assholes in the West.
Yeah, I mean, look, to go to one of Glenn's points earlier, the United States, the United States response to one day of being attacked in 2001 included not only starting those wars that he mentioned, but also, mass warrantless surveillance, the Patriot Act, so like the government could do warrantless searches of people's library records, indefinite detention, right? It's like, I don't know. I mean, it seems like, and that was like, a one-day attack from people with very little capacity to inflict mass damage in the United States.
Box cutters, man. Like that is, to this day, an incredible thing. Like $1 trillion a year for us. Yeah, we have box cutters. You could do something to knock a building over.
We did all that, right? Because in 9/11, it should be intuitive that the more of a credible threat you can say you're under, like the easier it is to for your leaders to get away with being authoritarian and repressive.
That's a good example. At the Patriot Act in our country, I like that. Yeah, that's a great case. It happened right here. Even it literally did happen here.
Yep. Exactly. All right. We only have a little bit left, but let's go to post game. If you're a patron, you have the link to the post game. If you're not, there's never been a better time to turn your life around and become one. Patreon.com/Ben Burgis. So we will see people over there in just a moment to finish this up. Left is best.